So I'd like you to pay attention to your reaction to what I'm going to say here. Especially pay attention to the first thing that pops into your mind. So here goes. What is the biggest problem in the world? Now, most people, when they hear that question, they tend to think about some kind of problem out there. It can be war, poverty, it can be this or that, all kinds of things. But it's usually something out there. It's a problem in the world. But what if the biggest problem in the world is not in the world? It's in here. It's in the mind. What if the biggest problem in the world is the ego? And what if the biggest problem with the ego is a specific form of thinking that the ego is prone to? A specific form of looking at the world, which is what I call black and white thinking. So I know that it may sound obvious what black and white thinking is, but it can actually be somewhat subtle to understand it. I mean, I remember back, and it took me quite some time when I started studying the ego to realize how common black and white thinking is and how it's often disguised in various ways. Because black and white thinking seems very benign. But black and white thinking is in its simplest way to explain it is to say that you have a way of thinking where this is absolutely right, this is absolutely wrong. This is true, this is false, this is good, this is evil. And obviously you can look at world history, you could look at the world today, and you can see that some people have taken this to an extreme. They have become what you would call fanatics. They are fanatical because they think that they have the absolute truth, the only truth, and all others are completely wrong. I mean, many examples are religious people. Our religion is the only true one. Everybody else is wrong. The born-again Marxists that I met when I was in college many years ago, they believed that Marxism was the only true political system and anything else was wrong. And there are a lot of examples of this in the world. And of course, we can all look at history and we can see that people have taken this mindset, this black and white mindset, to some very, really stupendous extremes. I mean, my example is from my background is always Hitler, who had this idea that he belonged to the superior race, and he was not only justified in wiping out the inferior race, but it was necessary for him to do so. It was, in fact, beneficial for the world to do this. And see, this is where we get into the little more subtle aspects of black and white thinking. Because you can look back at some of these examples from history, and in hindsight, it's very easy to see that this was obviously black and white thinking. But at the time, many people couldn't see it. And if you look at the world today, you'll see there are examples, clear examples of black and white thinking, but most people don't see it that way. They don't see how extreme it is, how fanatical it is. And that's because black and white thinking has this idea or this tendency to disguise itself as being beneficial, even necessary, even the only way to look at life. And what this does is it leads to a very simplistic way of looking at life. For example, with people, right? We, our group, who belong to our Christian religion, we are right because we belong to the only true religion. Those Muslims, they belong to a false religion, a religion of the devil. Therefore, we have a right to kill them because it's God doing God's work to kill these people. In fact, it's better for them if they're killed, otherwise they'll go to hell for all eternity. The Muslims, of course, think we have the only true religion, and therefore Allah wants us to kill the infidels, the Christians, and it's better for them if they are killed. So you see, here are two groups of people. They're both trapped in black and white thinking. But they both think what they're doing is God's work. It's necessary. It's the way things should be. So what this leads to is that you are actually not thinking. And you're especially not using your intuition. What is intuition? Well, I've explained in some of my videos that we have the rational mind, the linear analytical rational mind. This is where we are thinking. But then we have intuition, which comes from the heart, and intuition really is our inner contact, our ability to make contact with something beyond our own minds. It can be our higher selves, or it can be what I've called the one mind. So what I've been saying in several of my videos is that behind all of the forms, behind all of the phenomena, is the one mind. And the one mind has this function to secure oneness between the creator and its creation. That's the horizontal oneness, where when we contact the one mind, we can realize we are more than the outer mind, we are more than the outer personality, we are more than human beings. But there's also a horizontal oneness that the one mind can give rise to, and that's we see ourselves as one with other people. So, in other words, if we make contact with the one mind inside ourselves, then we realize we came out of the one mind. The one mind is our source. But then the next step is to realize, well, but where did all other people come from then? Well, they also came from the one mind, because everything came from the one mind. So therefore, we can then gradually build this horizontal oneness. And when you have this horizontal oneness with other people, you can't kill them. Because what you realize is that you may have grown up in a Christian culture, but you are more than the outer person you were brought up to see yourself as. You are more than these outer characteristics that you were brought up to identify yourself as. And when you experience that, and that's what I mean with contacting the one mind, that's when you can't quite believe that those other people over there, even though they belong to another religion, that they are somehow subhumans, they are not really humans, therefore it's okay to kill them. You just can't believe in this. Even if some strong leader tells you that that's the way it is, you can't believe it. And so the real problem with black and white thinking is that it presents this very simplistic view of the world. Here's the problem. What's the cause of the problem? Oh, it's these other people. We need to either kill them, or we need to force them to do things our way, to see things our way. We need to force them to become Christians. We need to force them in this way or that way. All kinds of examples of this where one group of people have felt justified in forcing others. Now, the real problem you see with black and white thinking on a large scale is that you can see that it causes people, the population, to blindly follow leaders, strong leaders. And you see any number of examples of this in world history. You can see it right now if you're looking at the world right now. There are these people who are completely trapped in black and white thinking. Therefore, they are absolutely sure they're right. And they are presenting a worldview that they claim is absolutely right. But it always involves a scapegoat. There is another group of people, they are the problem. Here's, in the simplistic worldview, here's the problem. This is the main problem in the world. If we can solve this problem, paradise will come on earth. But in order to solve this problem, we have to force or kill or eradicate those other people, this other group of people. And you can see that some people have a tendency to follow these leaders. And what you can see in these people is that they are, from a certain perspective, they're blind. I don't mean physically blind. I mean psychologically, spiritually. They are blind because they don't have contact with the one mind in themselves. So they identify themselves based on all of these outer characteristics out there, and they identify other people based on their characteristics. So I am a Christian, therefore I am one of God's people. He is a Muslim, he's not one of God's people. It's like you instead of seeing that all human beings are out of the one mind, we all came from the same source, and behind all of these outer characteristics, we are the same kind of beings. Instead of seeing this, you are looking at the outer characteristics. No, these people are black. These people are Hispanic. These people are Muslims. These people are communists. These people are bad. And see, this is what comes in with the black and white thinking. It isn't just a black and white thinking. You could say you could say that there are examples in the world where we can make a distinction, right? This is a square. This is a circle. There's nothing in between there. I mean, it's a square or it's a circle. Here's a black field, here's a white field. It's black and it's white. But this is not what I really call black and white thinking, because this is just making a distinction between two things that are different, right? But what the black and white thinking always does is imposes this value judgment. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. You see? And once you have that, that's when you have this sense, we are right, we are the good people, we are God's people. Those people are wrong, they are bad, they are evil people, and we need to stop them. So there is always that, and that's what you can see, where black and white thinking, when it's taken too far, it leads to fanaticism. And in fanaticism, people always have a scapegoat. There's always a scapegoat, and it's that other group of people. And the way to solve the problem, the biggest problem in the world, is to force or remove that other group of people. And if you look at this, once you have some connection to the one mind, you are realizing, you are experiencing in yourself, yes, okay, I'm white, I have blue eyes, I have blonde hair, I was born in Denmark, I believe this, I believe that, but all of these are just outer characteristics. This is not really who I am. Behind all of these outer characteristics, I'm a spiritual being. I came out of the one mind. Now, you may be black or belong to another religion or whatever, but when I look at you, I'm seeing beyond the outer characteristics. I'm not identifying you based on these outer characteristics. I'm seeing you are also a spiritual being. And when we each see that in each other, we can't be pulled into black and white thinking. We can't be pulled into simplistic thinking. We can't possibly think that the only way to solve the world's problems is to get rid of those other people, because we experience a connection to other people. We are all human beings behind the facade. And therefore, when you have that connection to the one mind, you are not blind. You're not spiritually blind. But those who are trapped in black and white thinking, they are spiritually blind. And those who set themselves up as leaders based on this form of thinking, they are the blind leaders. And those who follow them, they are the blind followers. And when the blind lead the blind, both of them are going to end up in the ditch of duality. It's just a matter of, here's the road, the straight and narrow that Jesus talked about. And it's just a matter of, when you go too far into fanaticism, do you fall into that ditch or that ditch? Because you're going to end up in one ditch or the other. And this is what Jesus also called the broad way that leads to destruction. So the straight and narrow path is a path of oneness, of reaching for the one mind that helps you to see beyond all of these outer seeming differences between people. Now, let's make this a little more on the personal level. You can look at all these examples from the world, but let's look at one human being, one mind, one psychology. What is the effect of black and white thinking? Well, the immediate effect of black and white thinking is that you are thinking in terms of right and wrong in an absolute way. And this really becomes a straitjacket for your mind, because in order to maintain a black and white worldview, you can't think. You can't reach for the Christ mind. You can't use your intuition. Because Here's a simple mechanism. If a person in black and white thinking was proven wrong, that person would think it was wrong in an absolute way. A Christian, a fundamentalist Christian, who believes the Bible is the Word of God and that his interpretation of the Bible is the only true one, if he was forced to admit he was wrong, he would have to flip into the opposite extreme and thinking he was absolutely wrong. He would condemn himself in such a radical way that he couldn't bear it. Just think about this, you know. Well, let's step back a little bit. Let's ask ourselves this. Why is the ego so convincing to people? Why is the ego so alluring? Why is it so seductive? Why are so many people trapped in their egos? Why do they believe it? And the simple reason is the ego offers them an advantage. It's a short-term advantage, but the ego offers them an advantage. And you take a fundamentalist Christian, I have met my share of them. What's the advantage that the ego offers them through black and white thinking? They are feeling superior. They are feeling superior to all those who are not Christians. You can see it in many of them. You can see many of these preachers out there, see the way they talk, the way they, even the way they carry themselves or what they radiate. They feel they are superior to all those who aren't Christians like themselves, who can't see their literal interpretation of the Bible. And you can see it in many others. I mentioned the Marxists that I experienced when I was at college. They were also walking around with this aura of superiority. And growing up in Denmark, I didn't meet a lot of fundamentalist Christians, but when I moved to the United States, I met them. And it struck me how the demeanor, the aura they had, the fundamentalist Christians and the Marxists, it was exactly the same. It was that sense of superiority. We are clearly better than others. We are clearly superior. So that's the advantage that the ego offers you. But you see why that becomes a trap? Because when you're feeling superior, how are you feeling superior? You're superior compared to other people, meaning you're raising yourself up, but you're putting other people down. In fact, you are raising yourself up by putting other people down. That's what becomes a trap, because if you were to admit that the worldview, the black and white worldview that caused you to feel superior, if that was wrong, if it was proven to you that this was wrong, what would you do? You would have to condemn yourself as viciously as you used to condemn others. And most people can't bear that. And that's why they become trapped. The mind becomes a closed box. They can't bear to look beyond. They don't even dare to think about looking beyond it. And of course, how can you grow spiritually when you are in this mental box? And the answer is simply, you can't. Right? Now, here comes the difficulty. It's easy to see examples of black and white thinking in the world. It's easy to think that, but I'm not believing in these traditional religions. I'm not believing in scientific materialism, which is another black and white thought system, because there's nothing outside the material universe, and we know this with absolute certainty, and everybody who believes it different is a superstitious idiot. So it's easy to say, well, I'm spiritual. I'm not in a traditional religion. I'm not a Christian fundamentalist. I'm not a materialist fundamentalist. So I'm clearly not in black and white thinking. Well, when I look back at myself, I can see that I could have said that about myself since I was a child, because I never believed in Christianity, I never believed in materialism. But when I found a spiritual movement, not so much in my first movement, or certainly in my second one, I thought, now this is the highest truth. This is the highest spiritual teaching. And I really believed for a number of years that there wasn't anything higher than this. Wasn't that black and white thinking? At the time, I couldn't have seen it. You couldn't have convinced me. I would have come up with all kinds of arguments. I would have argued against me being in black and white thinking until I was blue in the face. But when I look back at it, I can say, of course I was in black and white thinking. It wasn't the extreme fanatical one. I wasn't ready to kill anybody who didn't believe in my spiritual teaching, but it still was black and white thinking. So, you know, the way I look at this today, by the way, which is a whole other topic that I won't go too much into, but is that there is no ultimate spiritual teaching, as I've talked about in several of my videos. Because when people are at a certain level of consciousness, what they need is not the highest possible teaching. They need what will help them take the next step up. So the ultimate teaching is always the one that helps you grow. And if a teaching claims to be ultimate, but forms a closed box that you can't grow from, well, it's not the ultimate teaching, right? So anyway, that's a side issue. So now if we look at this, again, the psychological effect of black and white thinking, what is it? Well, as I said, you can't bear to be wrong. You can see in spiritual people, and as I said, I was in that state of mind for probably 15 years at least, and I've met many people who are spiritual and who are in that state of mind. We believe our spiritual teaching, our guru, our philosophy couldn't be wrong. It couldn't be incomplete. It must be the highest. What does that do? It puts us in an extremely selfish state of mind. And again, I would have argued violently against this if you had told me this, 20 or 25 years ago. I would have said, oh, I'm not selfish. I'm doing this to save the world. But I was doing it to save the world as I saw it, so that I could feel that I was one of the good guys who was saving the world. And I also had a sense, maybe not quite as blatant as the Christian fundamentalist or the Marxist, but I certainly had a sense that I was one of the good guys. I was better than people who were not spiritual because I was saving the world. And so this, I would have said, was unselfish, but it was totally selfish. And this is actually what I came to see at a certain point, as I've described, where I had this experience to see that my path was driven by this human ambition. And of course, I will admit that, no doubt, most spiritual people are not as selfish as the fanatics we're talking about. We're not ready to kill other people. We are not violent. We're not ready to force people in that way. But we still think that everybody should be converted to our beliefs. And that is a form of black and white thinking. So the question is, how do we get out of this? Once we are in this mindset, how do we get out of it? And if you look at the world, you can see that there's only one way for people to get out of black and white thinking. And that is what I have called the school of hard knocks. And a school of hard knocks is where you take the duality consciousness, which, as I said, can always define these two extremes. So you define Christianity is the only true religion, all others are of the devil. And then you simply have to take that toward a more and more extreme point where you become more and more fanatical until you finally have had enough. You can't do it anymore. And you see the absurdity of doing this. The absolute absurdity of taking things to these extremes. And this is what has happened in the world with some people. They have taken one of these black and white viewpoints to an absolute extreme, trying to force the rest of the world to agree with it. And they've come to see it's just too much. I can't do it anymore. But spiritual people, we have done this probably in past lifetimes. So what we need to do as spiritual people is we need to be a little smarter. We need to say, okay, but could we still have remnants of black and white thinking? And we do, because, as I've said, once you go below the 48th level of consciousness, you go into separation and duality, and you are creating all of these subconscious selves, and they're all based on the duality consciousness. And the duality consciousness, one of its main characteristics is black and white thinking. So it is safe to assume that we have a number of these subconscious selves based on black and white thinking. So as spiritual people, we have a simple choice. Do we want to expose these selves by going to the extreme until we see how absurd it is? This could take a long time. It could lead to some very unpleasant experiences. And it could take lifetimes. The other option is we can say, okay, do I want to use a spiritual teaching, a teaching on psychology? Do I want to use tools to come to expose these subconscious selves so that I can see them without having to act it out? That's the choice we have. Now, most people in the world don't have that choice because they can't see, They can't, as I said, they can't look at the beam in their own eye. But as spiritual people, we are very, very close to making that switch where we say, okay, I see now that the spiritual path isn't about validating my black and white belief that there's only one true spiritual teaching or one true guru. I see now that the spiritual path is about overcoming these black and white beliefs by contacting in one mind but in myself. So I need to find some kind of tool, some kind of spiritual teaching that can help me do that. That's what you can do. That's what these talks about the ego is about. That's what all of my other videos are about. That's what all of the teachings on my websites and books are about. The spiritual path to a higher state of consciousness. And the lower levels of the spiritual path is really overcoming black and white thinking, even these more subtle forms of black and white thinking. And, as I said, I go back 20, 25 years, I would have argued that I'm not in black and white thinking. Because the forms of black and white thinking I had, the subconscious selves I had, were so subtle, they were so ingrained, I was so used to them, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it was black and white thinking. So the question is really, are you willing to make that shift? Are you willing to start saying, okay, maybe there's a point here. Maybe I should look at myself. Maybe I should see if I have black and white thinking. Some of these subtle elements of it. And, the simple fact is that you can walk the spiritual path at the lower levels, and you can make progress while maintaining these subconscious selves based on black and white thinking. This can be done. But you can't go beyond a certain point. There comes a point where you're going to feel stuck. You're going to feel like you're dragging this weight behind you, like you are not getting anywhere. You're going to feel like all the things you used to do, whether it was chanting or meditating or mindfulness or going to retreats or all of this, that it just isn't working anymore the way it used to. And this is a sign, this is always a sign. There is something in yourself you haven't looked at. There's some subconscious self you haven't seen. And you won't go to the next level of spiritual path until you look at it and let it go. And so that's why I'm saying you have to realize, if you want to use these teachings on the ego, you have to realize how the ego has a tendency to become this closed circle. And it uses some subtle reasoning to make you think, oh, you don't have to look at this. You don't have to get beyond this. This is okay. This can even be spiritual. And it just isn't true. I mean, it just isn't true. But the only way you're going to see this is by, first of all, using a spiritual teaching to come to think about this consciously. I remember back at myself. And when I started looking into ego and psychology, I would always follow this same pattern. I'd first study, and sometimes it would be a book about psychology, for example. For example, there's a very good book by an author called M. Scott Peck, and it's called People of the Lie. And it talks about this, black and white thinking and ego. And I remember studying that for several years. So I study a teaching, I try to understand it with the outer mind. Then I start giving my invocations, my decrees to the Ascended Masters to invoke light into the condition, because I know there's energy in my emotional and mental minds that are preventing me from seeing a condition clearly. So I make the calls for this to be transformed, and then I call to the Ascended Masters to help me see it. And what usually happens is, after I've done it for some time, I process it in my mind, I process it in my conscious mind, then I just let it go. I send it into the subconscious mind, wait for what's going to come back intuitively. I do the calls for the energy to transform the energy, and then I call to the Ascended Masters. And after some time, I get an insight. And I see something. Oh, I hadn't seen that thing before. And this worked for me. It worked for me from the moment, I mean, I've probably always done it in a certain way. From the moment I really grasped what Ascended Masters are about, I've been doing this. Making the calls, calling to the Ascended Masters to help me see something. But I still, as I've described in other videos, I had certain things in my psychology that I couldn't really look at. And one of the things I couldn't look at for a long time was this black and white thinking, that I actually had elements of black and white thinking. And it took me a while, but I came to the point where I realized that all of my life I had actually been aware of black and white thinking. And I had been pretty good at seeing it out there in other people, Again, I grew up learning about Hitler, so it was very easy to see he was trapped in black and white thinking and fanaticism. And I was in my conscious mind, I was very, very determined that I can't allow myself to go into this. I can't allow myself to go into this. It was like one of the worst things that could happen was that I went into this kind of fanatical thinking. But this is what I mean. This is what becomes a trap, because this became a trap for me, because now I couldn't really bear to look at, do I actually have a self that's in black and white thinking? Because then I would condemn myself. So it took me a while to process this in my mind and to get to the point where I realized, but it's actually the other way around. Because if I don't look at the self I have that's in black and white thinking, how am I ever going to get over it? And if I don't get over it, how am I ever going to reach a higher state of consciousness? So it's actually not in my own interest to suppress this, which is what my ego wanted me to do. It's in my interest to get it out and see it, because there are two ways to be right. As I've said before, you can be right in the world, or you can be right with God or your higher self or the ascended masters. So the ego wants me to be right in the world by not admitting that I have elements of black and white thinking, and by suppressing the selves that are in black and white thinking. The ego is always suppress and deny, suppress and deny, suppress and deny. And that's not going to lead to growth. So what is going to lead to growth? It is that I see and resolve. That's what's going to lead to growth. See and resolve. And when I realized that, I came to the point where it took some time, of course, but I began to be able to look at this. Do I have elements of black and white thinking? And of course I did. Of course I had separate selves. We all do, because we've all gone below the 48th level of consciousness, and at the 48th level you create selves, and they're all based on black and white thinking. Hello, this is just a fact of life. I didn't know that for many years. If I had known it, it would have been easier. That's why I'm hoping it'll be easier for you. But there still comes that point where you have to have this hitting the concrete experience to say, oh, you know what? Despite what my ego wants me to believe, I'm not this sophisticated human being spiritual being that doesn't have these problems that human beings have. No, I'm a human being like everybody else. I have discovered the spiritual path, and I'm willing to walk that path. But my success on the spiritual path does not depend on allowing the ego to suppress any unresolved psychology. My progress on the spiritual path depends on my willingness, the conscious use willingness, to look at the unresolved elements and resolve them. That's what I realized. And that's when I realized I had to find a way to break that closed mental box of the ego, break that closed circle, and simply say, what do I want? Well, I want growth. I want growth more than anything else. And one thing that helped me there, I had a period where I thought about this. There's this very simple statement in the Bible. It's actually in the Old Testament. I think it's in Proverbs. Let no man take thy crown. And the way I came to see this was that my crown, you have the king who's wearing a crown. It's the symbol of his power. So my crown is my contact with my higher self. And I can't let anything in this world take that, stand in the way of and interfere with my contact with my higher self. And then I came to see that the one factor, there are of course many other factors, many outer factors that can do it, especially other people, but the one factor more than anything takes my crown is my ego. That's what's trying to prevent me from making contact with my higher self. So I had to decide, what do I really want? Do I want oneness with my higher self? Or do I want to remain trapped in this ego-based sense of being a separate being? And, that's just the choice. And when we make that choice, that's when the path really begins, as I said in the previous video. That's when we really start the spiritual path. And so I hope this has been helpful to you. I mean, basically you can say that the ego's ultimate dream is to always be right. But there is, unfortunately, a very subtle phase that we can go into as spiritual people when we begin to separate ourselves from the ego. Because as I said, many of us who are spiritual people, we are not in the extremes of fanaticism. We're not ready to go out and kill somebody to promote our religion or political philosophy. So we have already in past lifetimes started to overcome the more extreme aspects of black and white thinking. But the problem is that this can lead us into another aspect of the ego's thinking, which is sort of the polar opposite to black and white thinking. What I've said is, in the duality consciousness, everything has two polarities. So one aspect of the duality consciousness is black and white thinking, which defines everything in terms of black and white. There's always a right and wrong, two opposites. But if you step back from black and white thinking, you see that black and white thinking is just one polarity, and it has an opposite polarity, which is another form of thinking, where you don't think in terms of black and white, you think in terms of gray. And that's what I'll talk about in my next video, because that's actually the one that many spiritual people have become trapped in. I'm not saying that, as I said, we all have elements of black and white thinking still, but many people have overcome the more obvious aspects of black and white thinking, and they have been pulled into this gray thinking. And that's what I'll talk about in the next video.